I'd like to introduce to you my friend Ella Prichard, who is coming to join me here on the chancel steps now. Some of you may have known Ella through her work in other ways in Texas, particularly through Baylor alumni groups and so forth. Ella is from Corpus Christi, partly. She also lives part-time here in Dallas, and when she's in Dallas, she worships with us here, and she's usually sitting back there somewhere, but we got her up front today. Ella is the author of a new book that is about her experience after losing her husband and finding what the challenges she was facing as a widow. It's part spiritual memoir and part practical advice as well. And by the way, we have copies of the book today. It's published by Baylor University Press, and they are out here in the South Atrium. You're welcome to come by after the service and get a copy of the book or copies to share with other people, which seems to be a really popular thing to do. Ella's signing those, and then she'll also be speaking today at a luncheon at noon in Community Hall. Anyone who's interested is invited to come join us for the luncheon, no reservation needed. She'll be talking more about the book and her experience. Now, Ella, even though, like me, you're a journalism major, you from Baylor, former editor of the Baylor Lariat, which is a claim to fame we learned, you never thought you'd write a book.
Oh, no, that was the farthest thing from my mind. And, you know, I dealt with facts. And my dream before I met Lev was to go to New York and be the first female editorial writer at the New York Times, but never a book.
And yet, you've written a book now, and how did it come to be that this book has been published?
Well, it's publication.
Yeah, written. Let's talk about written.
We'll talk about the writing, because the publishing is a whole different story. But there wasn't a book for me when my husband died. What was out there did not help me with my grief. So I turned to Philippians, because that was a letter in the New Testament that I had been familiar with as long as I can remember, and it's always where I've gone when I was discouraged or depressed. And it took me a long time. Those first 4 years felt joyless. I realize now there were moments of joy, but in the midst of the grief, I really didn't recognize them or remember them. And then I went to Nantucket in 2014 and 2013. And to my amazement, I had this sensation of happiness and joy that I almost didn't recognize. It had been so long since I felt that way, and I had this crazy idea. I should write a book to help other widows reclaim joy. And, you know, I was 72 years old and unpublished. You don't write books that get published in those circumstances, but 1 year to write the first 30,000 words and 3 years to double it and deliver it to a publisher, and so here I am.
So I know that you mentioned that you couldn't find a book that helped you. There's self-help books out there, and there's devotional books out there, and you found a space sort of in the middle between those two things, right?
Yes, and that greatly complicated getting it published, because I had no idea that the secular and religious publishing companies were so segregated, and everybody, the agents, the publishers, were very afraid of a book that had both practical advice and quoted scripture. And so, I mean, I got lovely rejection letters. This will be very helpful. We don't know how to sell it. But that has been the appeal of the book, is that it's not just a devotional book about heaven, but that it acknowledges grief and deals with what we have to deal with to get over that grief.
And you've connected this not to heaven in the sense that a lot of people go to, but to Philippians. And how did that come about?
Philippians was a very important letter to my mother, and she must have taught me that verse, whatsoever state I am therewith to be content, when I was 4 or 5 years old. And so Philippians is just a place that a book I've known about and a book I've always turned to. And I'll tell more about that story at lunch.
Hear more about that at lunch today. Well, I know finally that you've had some surprises after publication in the ways that the book has been received. Who are the kinds of people who are finding a connection with what you've written about it and where you're speaking?
Well, it's very interesting. At every speaking opportunity, there's always a divorced woman who comes up and says, "You speak to me, you describe my grief, you describe what I had to do to rebuild my life." I've been surprised when accountants and lawyers and bankers tell me that they're giving it to clients. I'm not so surprised when I hear that ministers are giving it to new widows, but for the professionals to be giving it to their clients is very meaningful to me. They're not afraid of the spiritual part of the book. The other surprise is that men come and buy the book either for their mother or to understand their mother. And I've had some really interesting comments from men. I think one of the saddest was a friend wrote me, he had read every word. He said, "I wish I'd had this 12 years ago when my father died, because my mother's experience was similar to yours, but she never found a way out." And Philippians to me was a roadmap from grief to joy, and it breaks my heart that everyone doesn't know there is a way out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you for being here with us today. And again, everyone's invited to meet Ella in the South Atrium after the service, and then to join us, if you'd like, for an extended conversation in the community hall with lunch at noon.